Hello, everybody. Welcome to this track in Unconference, Future of Education. I'm happy to introduce our first speaker, Mohan Prasad. Mohan is an educationist and he's an author of historical fiction. He graduated from IIT Delhi and IIM Lucknow, and he has spent 10 years in the ed tech sector building products and leading services for usage at scale at NIIT, Merit Nation, Career Launcher, and ByteDance. He has also been an active mentor to scores of students across various age groups. So without further ado, Mohan.
Thanks a lot, Mohan Pani. I'll just share my screen as well. Hi, friends. Good afternoon to everyone in the US and good morning to the people in the eastern part of the world. So, it's great opportunity to speak in a Pan IIT conference, and especially on education. That's something I'm quite passionate about and spent my entire career in. And today wanted to talk about something outcome oriented mentoring. What exactly, and which basically I define as guiding students with empathy and structure. So what exactly is outcome oriented mentoring? So this is something that I believe would help us all in reimagining edtech. So in edtech, especially in India, when you see it's like education to the masses, education to large batches, and it is education. So the guiding, the one-to-one connect between the student and teacher, and probably student and some kind of a mentor, which was the old Indian traditional way of Gurukul Parampara. That is missing, and that is missing in the education sector, but it is present in a lot of sectors. So I personally, as a mentor to a lot of students, as my personal initiative, I try to do that, try to connect with them, helping students live up to their potential. And today I just wanted to share a few stories and how through those students I'm learning how to engage with them more, and how I'm also learning how to find mentors for myself. So for my growth also, through the interaction with my students, I'm trying to find that aspect of my personality as well, where I get to learn from people who can mentor me in different aspects of their lives. And this is currently what my structure is. It is basically with a regular connect with the students, where you have that trust building with the students. So what happens when you have a regular, when the student trusts you, he or she feels that you have an empathy for them, you can think in their shoes, so they're able to share their problems with you. And this mentoring, though it is for the students who are mainly looking for getting ahead in their academics, but the reality is there are obviously a lot of other issues they're overwhelmed with, or they just want not necessarily solutions but someone to listen to them. And on the selfish side, it also helps me try to be a bit more young, talking to 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 16-year-olds, so how they're going about in their lives. And there have been some really interesting stories. So because I come from a rural part of the country, so somehow I have that connect. I'm able to better connect with students who are from the rural part of the country, because their needs sometimes are different than the urban students. And you get to know some amazing stories, how people are growing up, how people are overcoming their obstacles, how people are really challenging their really, what should I say, really overcoming their struggles basically. So I just want to share two stories, two very interesting stories, and why those stories help me understand that this mentoring for students is really important as well, and how the time of it has arrived. So the first story is of a young student named Piyush Bhardwaj, bright student, but somehow he had a very low rank in his JEE exam. And JEE, for all the students who are in the science stream in India, still engineering and medical are two of the most desired profession. So this guy comes from a low income family. He couldn't afford coaching. Somehow through an acquaintance we got connected, so I started mentoring him. And what does mentoring here means basically is just helping him understand that what all he can do, from where can he study, not teaching him, because I'm not an expert at that, so I can't teach him, neither do I have time enough for that. I hardly can give him, say, half an hour per week or something like that. So helping him just understand that probably J is an exam where he needs to practice more, he needs to be more focused, understand what should his strategy be, and most importantly, trying to listen to him, trying to help him be less overwhelmed or help him be more relaxed. This guy, his score improved in 3 months. His score improved tremendously. Most importantly, he got a very good college where he's taken admissions into computer science engineering. Even more important, this guy now is really motivated to target an IIT admission next year. So he's already taken admission into a college, but he still wants to prepare for JEE exam and get into an IIT. And when you talk to him and his friends, so these are all bright students coming from slightly lower income families who may not have had the best opportunities. So they can't afford coaching, which 90% of JEE preparation students in India do, or most of the urban students for their school studies also do. He can't afford that, but that guy is motivated enough, and you feel like, oh, how can I just help him, push him to the next step in his life. A second story is of a very smart engineer. So this guy was placed in, I think, Netherlands after his engineering, but he didn't join because he was the only son. So his parents wanted him to be in India, and he comes from a well-to-do family. So he joined a PSU. He had a rural posting in a village in Uttar Pradesh. The problem was that in that PSU, so this was a guitar playing uh, school college representative kind of a guy. Now in a small village posting, he started getting frustrated because his supervisors probably were slightly jealous of him. That can happen in various PSU roles. And he even got a threat from someone, so he had to carry a knife with him just for his own safety. And this Delhi guy
Okay.
was really, really getting frustrated there. So he started writing CAT exam. Basically, he wanted to go for an MBA, which was more of a looking for a way out. So less for an MBA, but more of a way out from his current role. So when I connected to him, it was more for his interview and GD preparation. So I started helping him. Now, again, in this case, what I really need? All he needed was to someone to remind him that you are a brilliant guy, you can do this, and you don't need to be frustrated in life just because you are at a post that you are not most suitable for, or you just don't want to be in. So he just needed someone to listen to him, and he's not very young. He's a 22-year-old, 23-year-old actually. But what happened is, while working with him, while discussing with him, what I realized was that it's not just school students who need mentors. It's basically college students, young professionals as well. And this might be the case for even larger, even older people. But the reality is the 2 months of just discussion with him, and that 2 months, if I total it in hours, that would hardly be 10 hours, 10 to 12 hours mainly. So that 10 to 12 hours really helped this guy change his attitude, really helped this guy try to get into a place where he would be happier, where he could plan for the next phase of his life. And this is what I feel is the reimagination that edtech needs to do. That we have to somehow bring that one-to-one connect for the students, where the mentor has to be a friend first, then a parent, then a counselor or a teacher. So the mentor basically just helps someone and helps encourage someone, push someone, listen to someone. And I'll be very frank. So while I was in my engineering in Delhi, even in 2007, so this is something I wanted to do. I remember in my output profile, I had written this word. The mentor word was not in fashion then. So I written I want to be a counselor for students. I did not know exactly what counseling, but I wanted to talk to students one on one. And this is something I was good at, but most importantly, coming from a smaller place, I always felt the gap of someone guiding me. My parents weren't that educated, and I always felt that gap. And I really believe that the edtech in India, which is getting really advanced, and some of the edtech companies are doing really well, and probably there might be in 5 7 years, we never know. People are saying that as China is leading the e-commerce, India might lead the edtech. So we would have to bring out newer models, and considering the large demographic of students that we have, we might come up with very innovative models that can lead the world into how to inspire students to live up to their potential, to do their best. And this gap that we're trying to identify is because 9 out of 10 parents that we interact with, and in fact, I'll be frank, I've interacted with hundreds of parents just out of curiosity to understand how they're guiding their students, how they're guiding their boards. And I realize most people don't have time. or they themselves are overwhelmed, they're not able to do that. And what this is doing is the academic pressure and the peer pressure that is leading up to one student suicide per hour in India. And that really bothers, to be frank, anyone it would bother, because this is very young people, probably with no other tension in life, no other unnecessary pressures in life, just because of their academics or because of their peer pressure, or just the need to fit in. A lot of them are just ending their life. So that is where the role of an interesting a mentor who they can look up to, who is not their parent, who with whom they can be more frank, who with whom they can talk to freely, and just release the pressure they have, release the stress they have, that is really needed. And while I've been doing that with scores of students, what I've realized is that there is a particular structure that really works with them. These are students, they don't want to be they're already getting taught a lot, they're already talking to their parents a lot, so they don't want to be uh, pushed too much, they don't want to be in touch with you too much, they don't want that too much of connect, all they want is some regular touch. That is it. So what I try to do is, for young students, I try to track their daily progress. So they fill in their Google sheet what they are doing, I just look at it for 1.5 minutes, just WhatsApp them. I try to have a weekly call. What's on track? What are any new issues that they have? And even the daily progress tracker, what I try to build for them is, so they have a goal. So say someone is in school in grade 10, they're on track for a 75% exam marks in marks in their exams, and they want to get up to 85%. It might be their aspiration, just their parents want, whatever. So I just help them understand from 75 to 85 how you can achieve that. And if this is the goal that you have set for yourself, backtrack and see what you need to do monthly or weekly or daily, and just keep that nudge. Are you doing that? So that it does not create unnecessary pressure on them when they feel that they're off track. And one thing very important is, so overall you want to discuss with them what is the career that they want to get into. Do they understand what a normal day for that career would be? What extra needs to be done if they really want to get into that career? If someone wants to be a musician, I can't help them be a musician, but what I can do is talk to them, understand them. Yeah, if you really want to get into music, probably this is the person you can connect to, this is the course you can join, something like that. And that really helps the students, because at times they're not free to talk to their parents in such a way. Most of the parents in India still are more uh, uh, very conservative when it comes to career orientation. And the personal discussions also help reduce their anxiety, reduce their stress, which becomes very important. Frankly, this is the most important part, I believe, that they just have someone older to talk to, whom they can slightly trust. And this trust building takes time. And these are the models that I have tried to learn from, because mentoring, student mentoring, frankly, in India is not established. I don't know if it's been established anywhere in the world. It might happen in some pockets, but it's not an established thing. So when I try to do this, I try to learn from a few models which are well established in the mentoring space. So something like CXO coaching is very well established, and there is one person whose work I regularly follow, called Habit Strong. When it comes to elite sports, you would see that there are mentors, there are mental coaches, skills coaches obviously are there. And then individual players often have their own coaches when it comes to team sports as well. Individual sports, obviously, team sports as well. The players have their own coaches, and these coaches are not there necessarily to tweak their technique or help them improve in that. More importantly, they're just there to help these persons be on track. Uh, if there's any mental issue, deal with them, help them motivate when they're down, help them just encourage when they're doing fine, and help them relax when they're just overexcited. And a bit of counseling. So counseling obviously is always there. Counseling has been there for, I guess, not decades, probably centuries. But so this, and from counseling you can learn a model, because we as a generation more think of in the terms of corporate stress. But my parents, or a lot of our parents, were not necessarily stressed by their corporate jobs, but this stress has trickled down to students as well, and the students 20 years ago were not necessarily these stress. So the learning that the corporate stress, or the way that we have dealt with adult stress, probably those learnings can be utilized for the students as well. Another thing that startup mentoring, obviously, it is a very known phenomenon that is happening across the world. And so these are some of the things I try to learn from. And this is a model I'm sure that in India and other places of the world also, there's a lot of scope to evolve, and it is already evolving because I know of a few startups which have just started in this space. There's one in India called Mentor Card. There's another called PragB, whose founders even I know. They're trying to do in this space, but it is still evolving. I frankly say it hasn't evolved to a stage that it has become a big business yet, but it is an evolving model, but it is quite the need of the day. And why I believe that the time for this has come is because students are, at least in this pandemic, students are very physically disconnected with each other and their teachers, and the overwhelming options, too many career options, and the peer pressure, academic pressure, everything, for the perform anxiety to perform, everything is existing there. So they need some connect there, some non-parental connect basically there, people who can, they can trust. And there is a large group of supply. The supply is already here. The supply is already here. Earlier it was probably not as visible, but because of technology and because of a few edtech startups like Whitehead Junior or few math webs taught us that we can create supply. So there are a large group of corporate professionals who can devote 1 2 hours a week. They're retired or active teachers, educated homemakers who can devote time to mentor students. And frankly, I have not come across a person whom you approach that a student needs some kind of mentoring, some kind of help, and the person is not ready to help. I have yet not come across such a person. So the reality is the supply is there. There's some way to connect mentees and mentors that is needed. And that connect already is happening through Zoom and other services which are easier to maintain, easier to record, easier to track and flag if there are any off tracks from the student side, if there are any issues that are coming up. So it is slightly easier to do all that. And the acceptability of this online connect has also increased because 1 year ago I don't think that many people were comfortable on online teaching, online events, online. But we are doing a very big event online now. We know how much of the acceptability has increased in this space. So the time, right, the time is now where this one-to-one thing, especially the mentoring thing, is going to take off, and we probably can help in that in some way. We can help mentor students who are in our network, whom we are connected to in one or the other way. They can be kids of a relative, they can be kids of a friend, or just somewhere near our school, our own school alumni, something like that. And this is a mentoring gap in the edtech sector in India that I just put on screen. A very big table. I'll just highlight one thing. So a lot of the institutes, they're doing great when it comes to synchronous learning, basically live classes or recorded classes. But the interesting thing, and they have good insights on their students. So how the students are performing, what are the issues they're facing. But when it comes to mentoring, the live classes have some bit of mentoring because the teacher has at least some connect to the students. But the reality is, when it comes to actual in-depth connect, it is just missing. It's just missing from the ecosystem. Okay, that was on the PVC side. I hope I was in time. So, and in fact, I'm putting it out here. I regularly mentor students free of charge. If someone wants to connect me for that, if you know some students in there, you can just connect them with me.
Thank you, Mohan. Um, so our next speaker is Mr. Rajan Johri. He's the managing director at Leadwin. He's going to speak on the topic education, a service system for co-creation of value. So Rajan is a service science practitioner working in change and transformation domain. He holds postgraduate qualifications in anthropology and organization behavior. He's a fellow of CIPD UK, and he researched at um, Department of Management at IIT Delhi. Uh, Rajan has worked for 3 decades across Europe, Asia, Pacific, and the Middle East, leading HR, organization development, L&D, and quality functions for reputed multinationals like NIIT, Ranbaxy, Boston Scientific, etc. He was also the CEO of MB informatics in the Sultanate of Oman, and he was the principal consultant organization effectiveness for HCL and also the founding director of Shiv Nadar University. So, so Rajan, if you please go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you. I want just a minute to share the screen. So, good morning to everybody and welcome. I am with you today actually to change your perspective on something that we experience all the time, and we have seen it happening with our friends, with our children, and also with generally as you look across and find notes being shared. But I want to look at education as a service system. And I want you to move from the archaic, where did you learn and in how much time, to how much mastery you have got in whatever you've learned and wherever you've learned. And this is very important because most of the time, when you sit on the other side of the table to recruit, you find that you could come from a big, nice, great Ivy institute, but you still don't have as much basics as some of those people who come in from the B, C, D, E institutes. So I want you to change this approach from what you see on the left to what you see on the right. But before I do that, let me first define service and value in the context of education. So technically, service means a provider to receiver interaction that creates and exchanges value. And since this is a very, very debated concept and very contested, I still believe that the definition I find it is how do you assess overall utility and usefulness of any product or service that you purchase or buy. And similarly in education, it is about what is received and how much of that you've actually used or you use it later. And as you are now moving, you recognize that happening so much across the world in the current pandemic situation. We realize that it's a competency based world. So, how much you know is less important. How much of what we know and mastered and applied is more important. So, if somebody has a C plus in some subject, it does not matter whether you are able to get a B or an A, but if you are able to answer or apply whatever you have got in C plus, I think that takes you further away. So we are starting to look at education as a service system that creates value. I have used this word, though it doesn't kind of exist generally. I call it servitizing education. And what I mean here is that we need to create value if we want to reinvent education as a service. And a lot of people talk about that, but I would like you to consider looking at it as a continuous improvement process. And you heard Mohan talking about mentoring and coaching, which is almost quite close to what it means. So this does not mean that we are asking people to abandon the traditional methodologies of teaching and training. But what we are saying is that if we can somehow look at this word co-creation, and we're talking about learning co-creation by as many stakeholders or at least the key stakeholders, then I think you've got a great service perspective that's happening with the system of education. It also gives a lot of questions to the faculty members, the ones who are teaching. How can you have more productivity, quality, and all the struggles that we have in the country with respect to compliance with law, healthcare, the initiatives government has taken? What can we do? And therefore, that's an important part of what servitization in education actually means. So, no wonder if you look at these statistics everywhere, more and more students are joining in services. And this is not only true for management and engineering, even students from commerce, sciences, you go and meet them at some kind of a mall or a shop or a kiosk or a service center, and most of them would actually tell you about their backgrounds, and you'll be quite either sometimes happy or unhappy or disappointed. But that's the way it has been going. And so 80% of people are now in services sector. I do agree, and I do find this debate happening many times, especially with me, when I say that it's a very complex system and you need to servitize it. And then people say, oh, you don't understand it as well, which I agree, even though I have had some chances of being on the other side. But I do believe that, yes, it is more challenging than many other enterprises. And with the increased pressure now, because of the current pandemic, you note that you need to have education becoming much more entrepreneurial than what it was before. Now, who are the stakeholders in this complex system? So you have this traditional view where you got students, faculty, staff members, administrators, regulatory agencies, and so on and so forth. And in service system view, we are looking at now moving into somehow talking and connecting with the alumni, the funders, the companies, and accreditation agencies. We need to get them together as a stakeholder in this. If you don't look at them as a stakeholder in this complex system, then we'll continue to live in our own archaic silo. That's what I've been saying in this particular slide. From resources point of view, there are some separate entities that you see on the left-hand side of the screen: faculty, staff, physical spaces, etc. And on the right-hand side, you see the pitch that I'm trying to make through this presentation, and request you, if you can share it with other people with whom you connect. If you see resources from a service system point of view, then it must lead to a shared and exchangeable enterprise expertise. I've noticed that we keep on inventing and teaching the same things, whereas we find that there is availability. Say, for example, a good basic accounting course is available with some other faculty at some other institute. Why not try and see if we can connect with that? And instead focus on something that we are good at doing at our own enterprise. Sharing of online resources and sharing of intellectual resources, as I just mentioned. So I recognize that you could think of resources as resource integrators or service bundlers, because no longer can you view the teacher as an entity only providing the service of education. A lot of people are connected with that. In fact, the instruction itself combined with other supporting services, for example, you heard mentoring, coaching, even maybe library assistance, all of that constitutes the bundle of offerings that make up the service of education. And for this reason, from a service logic, all individuals and entities are viewed as a resource integrator or service bundler. At least this much, that you can get a service perspective on this, means that you're historically, or rather holistically, perceiving students' needs. Therefore, the value of a lecture is not something that the instructor is producing alone. It is the value of that lecture comes when you're co-creating it with the students. And that's what we mean by being a resource integrator. So I believe that an ecosystem to co-create value can happen if you expand the network, include local enterprises, regional enterprises, national enterprises, and even professionals and chartered bodies, if you kind of network and get them involved, not like once a while inviting them for a guest lecture, but like on a continuous basis. You also create an open access to faculty members, a privileged access if you are a member of that group. So privileged access, even to adjunct and affiliated faculty. I've served as a couple of times as an instructor, and I realized that sometimes you don't have that option available with you. You're given a restricted hour, and sometimes you have much more meaning to add. 24/7 availability of support staff, which is also sometimes missing. Maybe the employment rules, contractual rules, but we need to look at that. And rights to the IP generated by stakeholders. Now, I don't mean that you can transfer the rights, but right to access is what I mean. If you've done something wonderfully well and that can add a different kind of a perspective you're learning, why not try and put it into the ecosystem? This is what it looks like to me. We can look for some more discussion later on. I believe that these are not just, statements that you're making or giving it another name, but I sincerely believe that teaching should actually mean transfer of knowledge, and not that syllabus being covered or something that you need to do because it's been prescribed, but something that you can develop insightfully. You also have a lot of people who manage knowledge, and especially in a lot of L&D managers, a lot of people who are administrators, institute directors. They're all great guys who are actually managing knowledge, but very few who are actually creating knowledge. And therefore, research and supporting research becomes very critical in a service system. And co-creation with users, Like I said before, entrepreneurs, governance people, skill development people, and people who do designing of systems and products, they can really give you a lot of feedback that works. And all of that put together, you blend it, you integrate it for engagement and sustainability. And nowadays, everybody says that the most critical thing is agility and resilience and acceptance of accountability. That's a very critical part of this, as you see, I've diagrammatically represented. Actually, we need to recognize that any value that is dependent on the involvement of others, by definition, it is co-created value. And if we said earlier, it has to be students involved in the lecture to make it valuable. And increasingly, the other side of the coin is that because of specialization in our country, and super specialization within a subject, and more dependencies are created if you live in a contemporary society. But we don't seem to be focusing on looking at it as an ecosystem. We stay in a silo and we just keep working in that. We forget that there are multiple parties in a service. And if you are going to create an experience, as the word nowadays goes around, then you need to be actually doing a lot of multiple parties in the service. We also need to realize that the co-creative nature of value, especially in education, it actually unfolds over a period of time. So technically, a degree that you get in the institute is just about the starting point. What you really see happens over the years of accomplishment of the person's life. It's like, that sustained release capsule that you take sometimes in medicine. So exactly like that. It's a sustained release and lifelong learning, which is essential to sustain, thrive, and grow, even while you're traversing these unpredictable career paths and economies that we have currently had in the pandemic, and I'm sure it's going to stay for a long, long time. So this diagram is a representation of that. You notice a word I've written there called uni. I've just pointed to make it simple enough. It means that you're going to be having something called a university nurtured enterprise, and that creates an ecosystem. So that's what we call by uni. Coming back to the word servitization, it's all over everywhere. You need to recognize it and see it. In fact, if we start to recognize that each one of us either creates service or we give service. So it's kind of connected. And lots of years ago, couple of decades ago, if you ask somebody, what does your father or your grandfather does? And most of them would come back and say they are in service. And we've forgotten that. We talk about it very differently today. So look at healthcare. You need to see it not only as a system of medicine and surgery, but of holistic wellness. Look at the way you own cars now. Sometimes it appears it's not necessary anymore because you got people who can provide you that service. And some of the latest ones that are happening, you've got engines being sold not because of the production line has got engines which have to be in the market, but because they say an engine is a service instrument. And Rolls-Royce likes to call it power by the hour. So therefore, downtime, you need a service level agreement. You need something that makes sure that you contribute as a business partner for that organization. And all of that and many more are examples of servitization. So therefore, if you look at some of these concepts and some of these examples as you go through the understanding of the word service in a system, you will be able to add many more. So I am proposing in this presentation, and also I request you to talk about this whenever you can, and maybe we can exchange notes. We do have academic institutions that offer incubators, but that's only for a few handful of students. And we all know that out of 10, hardly 8 or 9 go away and 1 or 2 stay. We are saying let's have uni that can encourage much more than that. It's actually encouraging in the curriculum itself, you embed that internship with the academia and the industry. And you get them to actually create intellectual property, new technologies, maybe new designs, maybe new products, maybe a new service with real customers. It's not only just, imaginary customers. So no longer, I feel, is a case study as much important as it used to be when we used to teach in management earlier. It's important today still, but what is more critical is getting a real lifetime experience with real customers. And you've known some of the great guys from our own who have done so well. A couple of years back, they were just university students, and they've done so well that the whole world is kind of eating out of their hand. You can replicate uni as a smart city project, but that means that our higher education leadership, our college leadership, it must develop a service mindset. And we need to have institutions that can actually be more focused on collaborating, sensing, responding from the journey of students take through their education experience, and they go about accomplishing goals and their life. Perhaps I heard somebody saying that recently, that a real retirement pension is actually getting relearning opportunities. And that's a great thought and a great idea. If we can all go back to our alma maters or maybe other places and relearn as a great opportunity in life instead of only looking at pension as only money. I think we can contribute much more to all the great initiatives that this country is trying to take, and we move forward across globally. How can we do this, Uni?
Sorry,
I have
sorry to
personally
interrupt,
been
Rajan.
involved.
Just a couple of
I've
more
been seeing
minutes,
many
please.
things like that, but you've got so many projects that are happening which you can look at in this list, and perhaps this presentation may be with you, and we can share that with you. With all the projects that our country needs, human activity and development, and that focuses on governance. All of that can be brought together. And I finally feel the last slide for today is that we need to think of a model where students learn, work, and earn. We did have a couple of years back earn along with learn, but I'm saying you need to look at the working too. So learn, work, and earn. And we need to move from degrees to skills if we wish to avoid disruption in the talent supply chain that we are currently experiencing. And students will have to be educated, and this is the responsibility and accountability of our faculty members, educational institutes, and most of us, rather all of us, that the students become more innovative. They learn how to manage and thrive in uncertainty in work and in teams handling unstructured tasks. At the end, I would certainly like you to lead you to what was happening a couple of years back. So all this concept of service design and service thinking started to happen in 1998 when Roland Rust, a professor at the University of Maryland, and later on 2000 upwards, IBM Corporation, Paul Maglio and Jim Sprorer, they all came up with this kind of servitization of many businesses and the idea about service research. I invite you to think about it. And if you feel that, yes, servitization and introduction of service science in our curriculum can also be something that our faculty members can take up, I think we are on our way to create a much more stronger and robust system. Thank you so much for patiently listening to me. And perhaps later on, we can answer some questions to you.
Thank you, Rajan. Very thought-provoking indeed. If you can hang on towards the end, we can answer some questions.
Right.
I'm especially excited to introduce our next speaker, Rutika Muchala, and the reason is she's from my alma mater, IIT Bombay, and same department, EE, too. So Ritika is a B2B SaaS executive, Y Combinator backed entrepreneur. She has 10 plus years experience growing revenue and scaling operations for startups and large corporations. She has taken 13 products from vision to success, and she has led 7 cross-functional teams. She's ex-McKinsey. She has an MBA from Harvard, and of course, last but not the least, she's an engineer from IIT. So welcome, Ritika. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I will just share my screen and then get started. Great. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yep.
Fantastic. Hi, everyone. My name is Ritika Muchala, and as we heard, I am an IIT Bombay EE grad from the class of 2010. Over the past few years, I've built and been a key executive of several businesses in AI as well as in EdTech. Considering we are all at a pan-IIT conference on a Friday afternoon, I am going to safely assume that AI and education are both topics that you all care about here. So education shapes our future, and AI is definitely the way of the future, which is why I think it is important not just for us, but for every person in the world to think critically about how they are intersecting and how they will intersect going forward. Because if we're not careful, at some point our classrooms could look like this. And I bet that most parents in this audience are going to shudder at this thought. So that brings me to the question, what are the ways that AI can intersect with education? And how do we ensure that these intersection points that we choose lead to a brighter future for humanity? Let's start with looking from the perspective of educational institutes like colleges. Colleges face three strategic questions. The first one is, how do they make education worth it for students? Are they going to be able to ensure that a college degree results in a net positive value for students financially, as well as results in them being good citizens of the society that we live in? Deriving from this, to some degree, comes the next question. What should we teach? And finally, how do we deliver this in a way that is effective and ensures that students learn and have good outcomes? So these pillars are as applicable for every stakeholder in education, from K to 12 to online education companies to continuing education students as well. But for today's conversation, we'll just stick with colleges. Since the past few years, the media has been talking a lot about the rising costs of college education. We hear about how tuition fees are increasing at a much faster rate compared to the cost of living and the increase in wages. And especially during the pandemic, parents and students are wondering why they should be paying exorbitant college fees when they aren't even getting the whole college experience. So since I have been leading AI transformations for enterprises and seeing the huge impact it can have on costs and efficiency, I thought I'll take a look at how AI can help universities achieve similar goals. What I found was actually a plethora of opportunities. While public universities earn most of their revenue from tuition fees, they actually earn a large percentage of their revenue from their affiliated hospitals as well, which was new to me. So the basic revenue streams are hospitals as well as their actual schools. So both university operations and hospital operations can be optimized to increase revenue as well as profits, while ensuring that their social good goals are also met simultaneously. This is where AI can shine. This is where AI is shining when it comes to enterprises as well. And with the advent of new platforms and solutions in the market that are both easy to adopt and use and affordable, the timing is actually perfect for colleges to start making these shifts. And once they do that, colleges can start to become a little more affordable for students. So this is an area of opportunity where AI can intersect really positively with education. Let's come to the next pillar. How do we teach in the most effective manner? When we think about how AI will impact the way teachers teach, we often think about personalization in the classroom. While that is definitely one way to improve learning, we as humans have already come up with even more creative ideas. Classroom learning is one part of learning, and outside the classroom is also where students learn a lot, right? So let me give you an example of a tool that's doing really well in this space. There's a tool called Grammarly, you can see the screenshot here, that uses AI. Some of you might have heard of it. It integrates with your browser in a few simple steps. It provides suggestions as you type, and it helps learners improve their command over the English language. While this is learning that is done outside the classroom, as one might imagine, it has a tremendous impact on formal learning outcomes as well. This is simple to use, it's cheap, it takes a few minutes to install, and it makes a massive impact on learning outcomes. Even more impressive is when we can use technology not just to provide access to people in the classroom, outside the classroom, but to provide access to people that otherwise would not have had any access at all to education. Google just announced AI-powered glasses for blind and visually impaired people. This is news as of 3 days back. These glasses use AI to convert visual images into the spoken word, enabling users to learn about the world around them. Imagine the power of this in any sort of learning situation. This is a truly magnificent point of intersection between AI and education. Let's come to the third pillar now. What should we teach students? When colleges think about what they should teach students, one of the biggest drivers should be what is going to lead to employment opportunities for these students once they graduate. The World Economic Forum has found in a recent report that with the advent of AI, 133 million new jobs are going to be created, while 75 million jobs are going to be displaced. Net, 58 million new jobs are going to get created. While not all of these jobs require data science and machine learning skills, most of them require some amount of analytical skill and data literacy. If universities can guide incoming freshmen towards these streams, they can actually help make their livelihoods. And it's not just colleges that can initiate this change. Companies can too. There's a guy called Tony Bird. He was a barista on IBM's campus. When he learned that IBM has an apprenticeship program for all employees, he applied because he wanted to do something more in his career and he was motivated. And he is now a software engineer. He's making 3 times more than what he was making before, and he's able to provide his family with a much more comfortable lifestyle. Companies can do this, colleges can do this, companies and colleges can do this in collaboration, right? There are lots of companies like Guild Education that are doing incredible things. There are clear opportunities that AI is creating for people to upskill themselves and improve their livelihoods. I'd like to, after talking about these 3 pillars, close this conversation with a story that happened this summer. Because schools in the UK were shut due to COVID, the UK school system had a unique idea. They decided to use AI to allocate A-level grades to students based on the ranking of the students within a school and their school's historical performance. The system was designed to generate what are on a national level fairly similar results to previous years, right? So overall, that's what the algorithm accomplished. But it also led, as one might imagine, to thousands of grades being lowered from teachers' estimations. About 35% of grades were adjusted down by a single grade. Can you imagine what would happen with Indian kids and Indian parents if that happened? And while 3% went down by 2 grades and 0.2% went down by 3 grades, that meant that a total of almost 40% of results were downgraded. That may be true, that may not be true. But when a system does this and a person does not, that leads to a very negative feeling, because this is life-changing news for anyone who needed to achieve their predicted grades to secure their place in the university that they wanted to attend. Is there any parent or child in the world that will think that this is a fair system? Absolutely not, right? So this is an example of how AI can intersect with education in a way that does not lead to positive outcomes. While the intent of the UK government was a good one, the outcome was not. In order to avoid such situations, AI ethics is a topic that must be taught to all students, kids and adults all over the world. As AI becomes a more and more integral part of government and social life, we must all ensure that we make we influence and we enforce decisions that are based on the values that we want society to have. This will help us avoid biases, have positive impact, and build a world that we are all proud to live in. Thank you.
So I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Ganesh Swaminathan. Um, he's going to talk about the Puranas, a source of scientific learning. So, so Ganesh is an engineer from IIT Delhi. He has had an interest in space science ever since he was in school. After completing his MBA from IIM Ahmedabad, he spent most of his professional life in a multinational organization in the field of technology. And about 8 years ago, Ganesh developed an interest in the Puranas. He was fascinated by the insights the ancient text offered, particularly the parallels to space science. And he has researched most of the Mahapuranas besides other texts in preparation for writing a book. The title of his book is From the Beginning of Time. That reminds me of Stephen Hawking's famous title of The Brief History of Time. But and Ganesh currently lives in Singapore. So welcome, Ganesh. Please begin.
Thanks very much, Mohan. Thanks for the introduction. And hello, everybody. The segment that follows is probably going to be very different than what you've been hearing. It talks about Puranas as a source of science. Actually, what we'll be doing is talking about it in the context of the life cycle of the sun. Anyway, so while they are making the switch, so the word Purana in Sanskrit actually means ancient. So it is surprising that one would try and conflate something that is ancient, a text that describes itself as ancient, with the science of the life cycle of the sun, which is something that we've essentially understood in the last few decades. So anyway, so my suggestion is that you wait till the end of this discussion and then make up your mind on what you think before you come to any decision. So am I sharing my screen now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. So a couple of introductory remarks. First thing is the presentation cites verses from the Brahmanda Purana. The book cites verses from a dozen different Puranas, and all the verses are in English. So, I mean, there's nothing at this stage in Sanskrit or any other language. The English translations that I used are by a board of scholars that were sponsored by the government of India in the 1950s, and no alterations have been made to the translations. And both the science and the Puranas are quoted, and each segment begins with the science. So they provide a context for us to understand the verse better, right? So let's begin with the science of the sun. Very briefly, the sun is one of the billions of low-mass stars in the universe. It is the host star for our solar system, which means that all the solar system is bound by the gravitational force of the sun. It is a source of all our energy in the solar system. So it's the one element that produces energy in the solar system. And we can look at the sun as being composed of two parts. There's a core which produces the energy and where the fusion occurs. This is a region of very high temperature and pressure. And then there's a shell where this energy is transferred outwards through convection and radiation. And as for modern science, the life cycle of the sun is composed of 5 stages. There is a stage of birth. There is a stage of a young star. Hard as it may be to believe, even stars have a juvenile stage where they are extremely active. There is a current mature stage, which is about 4.5 billion years old already and is expected to continue for another 3 to 5 billion years, after which the sun transitions into a red giant. And then it gets to the white dwarf stage, which is essentially spells the death of the star. And for this discussion, we'll go through the red giant and the white dwarf stages of the star. So in about 3 to 5 billion years from now, the hydrogen in the core gets exhausted. Essentially, it all gets converted to helium. And once that happens, the sun can produce energy in two ways. So the helium in the core can fuse to form carbon, which is the next higher atom in the chain. And then the hydrogen in the shell can start to fuse to form helium. And what this does is that it releases an enormous amount of energy, and the sun grows hugely in size. It just becomes huge in size and becomes what is known as a red giant. And interestingly, what happens is that the sun grows so big that the planets of Mercury and Venus get absorbed into the orb of the sun. And you can see a schematic here where you have the disk of the sun, and then you don't see Mercury or Venus, and then you see Earth right next to it. So there's been a lot of computer modeling around this in the community, in the scientific community. And as per the current models, the surface of the red giant sun comes up very close to the Earth. And the sun is burnt, and the Earth is burnt by the sun's heat and all the flares that come up from the sun's surface. And there is a lava and hot rock on the Earth. And the Earth's crust cracks, and the hot mantle that is below the Earth's crust breaks through to the surface. And you can see the artist's impression here on the right, that the Earth literally glows from the heat of the sun. It's a very frightening picture, but that's where the current scientific thinking resides. Let's see what the Puranas say about it. The Purana, just like modern science has a specific term for the sun as a red giant sun, the Puranas call the sun in this stage as the Samvartakaditya. Samvartaka means destruction, Aditya means the sun. And so the Purana says, when the end of the Kalpa arrives, the sun of 7 rays assumes the form of Samvartaka Aditya, the sun of final annihilation, and burns down the 3 worlds. And so it's from the Brahmanda Purana, it's from the book 2, section 3 and chapter 3. So all the citations have the Purana, the book, and the verse number, so that anybody interested in doing more research can go back and reference it. This is not a stray verse in the Puranas. So I just want to add, there is a passage of almost 25 such verses and in the Brahmanda Purana, and to go through it will take an enormous amount of time. So I'll just give you a sampler of verses to give you a sense of the detail in the Puranas, right? So it starts with a drought on the planet, and this is when the sun is still growing in size. It's not yet the full red giant that we saw in the earlier artist illustration, but as it grows bigger, it heats up the earth, which leads to a drought. And the Purana says, then a continued drought lasting for 100 years takes place. Living beings deficient in strength become dissolved and get mingled with the dust. So essentially what it says is that if a plant or an animal is reliant on water, then it dies, and its body and its bones get converted to ash and dust, essentially. And then it says that the rivers and the oceans are turned into vapor. The Purana says, the 7 rays of the sun that blazes in the sky sucking up water, drink up water from the great ocean. And then it goes on to talk about the soil and the rocks, saying, being burned by their brilliant flames, the earth, including mountains, rivers, and oceans, becomes bereft of moisture and vicinity. And finally, the verse describes the earth as literally glowing from the sun's heat. It says, getting the fiery splendor transmitted to it, the entire universe slowly assumes the form of a huge block of iron and shines thus. And this is just what we saw in the artist illustration a short while back. And this is just as suggested by modern science. So an amazing correlation. So let's go on to the next stage, which is the white dwarf stage. And the core, in this stage, the core continues to undergo fusion. And so we saw that the helium fuses to form carbon. And over time, the carbon fuses to form oxygen, which is the next larger atom. And this process carries on till the atoms become so large they can no longer fuse. And when they can no longer fuse, they can no longer release energy. And what happens is that it's important to understand that in the sun that we see today, there is a core that produces an enormous amount of energy and heat. and which creates an outward pressure. And this pressure is dynamically in balance with the gravitational force of the huge ball of gas that the sun is. And so the sun is this perfectly spherical object that's glowing up in the sky. But once the core stops producing energy, then the core just collapses very quickly and it forms a white dwarf. And that the white dwarf is the size of the Earth. So it's very small and extremely dense. And what happens as a result is the planet starts to cool rapidly. And so we need to look at it in the form of the red giant sun, which was very large and its surface was very close to the Earth. And it was heating up the planet. And now the surface of this white dwarf sun is millions of miles away from the Earth. And it's not producing any heat. So effectively, it starts to cool the planet very rapidly. And what happens is that the water vapor in the atmosphere condenses to form giant clouds. And I have underlined the word giant here because this is far removed from anything of our everyday experience. So we need to imagine that during the red giant phase, the entire amount of water in the oceans, in the lakes, in the ponds, in the rivers has evaporated and gone into the atmosphere. And this includes the water in the polar ice sheets, in the glaciers, in the tops of mountains, in the bodies of plants and animals and insects that have water. Everything has now gone into the atmosphere. And this entire mass of superheated vapor is now condensing to form clouds. And let's see what the Puranas say about it. So the Puranas talk about this as the Samvartaka clouds, the clouds of dissolution. And it says, some of the clouds are the size of an excellent city. Some can be compared to herds of elephants. And some clouds shine like huge mountains. And then it says that the cloud shower torrential rain. The cloud shower rains in huge torrents. They destroy the whole of the extremely terrific and inauspicious fire. The earth gets flooded. And it is the pralaya at the end of the kalpa. So it says when with water so profusely showered, the universe gets filled up with it. So in summary, if you look at it, we saw the 5 stages of the life cycle of the sun: the birth, the young, and the mature, and the red giant. And we saw in the previous few minutes, we saw the sun described as a Samvartakaditya, describing the red giant phase. We saw the Samvartaka clouds describing the white dwarf stage of the sun. And obviously, for want of time, I did not talk about the birth. There is a story called the birth of Martanda, which describes this birth of Martanda as an inert star. Martanda, the etymology of Martanda is the word mrita, which is dead, and anda, which is fear. And so every star is born as an inert ball of gas that emits neither heat nor light. Then there's the story of the marriage of Samjana and Vivaswan, which is the young star. And Vivaswan is the young, active sun. Vivaswan is another name of the sun. And Vivaswan gets married to Samjana. And after marriage, he becomes mature. He becomes the mature star that we see in the skies today. And that's a beautiful story. So both the story of Martanda and Samjana describe these 2 stages in allegory. We saw, and there is a description of the water cycle in the Puranas. The water cycle was first understood in Western science in the 16th century by a French engineer. And so that's very well described. So you have an amazing amount of detail that's in the Puranas that in relation to the sun. And then it's not just the sun, it talks about the space and the geosciences as well. There is the science of the earth. It talks about the geography, the events in the past of the earth, such as the descent of Ganga. It talks about the Brahmanda, which is the Bhumandala, or the planetary disk, the disk of the planets which surrounds the sun, and the Loka, which is the Padala Loka, the regions of space above and below this planetary disk, the Devaloka and the Padala Loka. And probably the most complex of them all, it talks about the origin, disappearance, and the reappearance of the moon during the churning of the Kshiroda Sagara. And the origin of the moon is an area of current research now. It's not settled science. There's a lot that we still need to learn. There are some very compelling hypotheses, but it's not settled science. So some of these, all of these have been discussed in this book that I recently published, but the Puranas are a veritable encyclopedia of knowledge, and cosmology is a small portion of it, but there's a lot just in cosmology that we can learn from the Puranas. So I want to talk about Puranas and the nature of scientific inquiry, and there is this beautiful verse that I found also in the Brahmanda Purana, which says, "The learned man should comprehend and retain in belief by means of scripture, inference, perception, and reasoning after testing intelligently and carefully." So, so the first thing that is fascinating about this is it talks about scriptures as one of the four sources of knowledge. Inference, perception, and reasoning are the other three. So while scripture is primary, it's not the only source of knowledge. The second thing, and this is amazing, is that it talks about it being tested before acceptance. So most ancient texts rely on faith for acceptance, unquestioning acceptance. And here is a text that actually asks you to question and test intelligently and carefully. And this is a text that's considered canon and asks you to test all statements intelligently and carefully, including its own statements. So I thought this was a very, very telling statement in the Puranas. And finally, what I thought was interesting, it parallels the scientific method. So the scientific method is the steps of hypothesize, make a prediction, test for the prediction, and then once the test is accepted and peer reviewed, then you adopt it. And so all of these steps have been described, the testing and the subsequent adoption have been described elegantly in a single verse. And so in closing, I'd like to say a couple of things. So as far as education is concerned, aspects of the Puranas that are completely aligned with science, such as the life cycle of the sun, should be treated as a part of the history of science. I think they call out the fact that this knowledge was available to mankind way before. It's just that as we did not, the people reading the Puranas did not have an understanding of the life cycle of the sun, and so could not make the transition from what the written word was to what actually happened. There are other parts which are similar to science, but not identical. And again, I think science is primary in education. And one of the examples is the origin of the moon, as I just said. It's an area of current investigation. And we can use these as hypotheses that need to be tested. And if these stand up to scientific scrutiny, then I think there is a reason that they can be a part of the history of science or of knowledge. And finally, Indian texts are known for ritual and devotion. And and primarily for their exposition of the parts of karma and bhakti. May I also suggest that they be known for knowledge and the path of jnana, and more specifically for the area of vijnana. So thank you very much, and have a wonderful rest of the event. Thank you, Mohan.
Thank you, Ganesh. Very interesting. So now we have some time left for questions, and I'm going to use the moderator's privilege to ask the first question. Something near and dear to my heart. It's about access to education, and something that this pandemic has really starkly brought into focus. So usually, education is what determines, the dividing between the haves and the have-nots. It decides your future life, and usually all across the world, that's determined by either money. Your parents have money, you can buy you an education, connections, or an above average IQ or intelligence to crack intensely competitive exams in populated countries. So how do you, and I direct this question to Rajan and Mohan Prasad, if you will take 1 minute each. Do you see a sort of democratization of education with cheap access to information everywhere, where anybody can get at least a decent access to information, and what they do with information is from that point on them? Um, do you see costs coming down significantly where literally anybody anywhere can access um, any top quality education that they want? And how do you see that impacting the society in general? If Rajan first and Mohan afterwards. Thank you.
Thanks, Mohan. Yeah, that's a good question. Um, Let me just try to share with you the fact that democratization of education has happened earlier also. We have had opportunities where a student can opt for various kind of courses even though you're pursuing a very specific major or a core
Mhm.
subject.
Mhm.
So that was the beginning of democratization. But what we are currently suggesting, and what I mean by servitization of education, is that it should be seen as something to add value and not something that you have to spend time with. So if there is a degree that you have to finish in a certain period of time with a certain cost and by covering a certain syllabus, that's not what servitization means. You should actually include in it lots of opportunities for application. You should include real time opportunities. I'm not suggesting that we should do away with the laboratory, but what I mean is that you should be able to get to understand. As Rutika at one point of time was mentioning about AI, I understood that it was all about the new metrics that have come about, patient metrics and the rehospitalization, mortality. Similarly, if there was some metric of looking at what is the investment that you did in terms of time for your education, and how would that you reap the benefits of that over the next 30, 40 years, if there was a way to track that. And I'm very open to the fact, if somebody wishes to get involved, then we could even track those students and alumni, what they have accomplished. That is servitization, okay, not as much democratization.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
Thank you. Mohan, do
Yeah,
you have
so
a
what I believe is the education in the internet, basically it was always there. Well, at least it was there for the past 2 3 years. But what the pandemic has done is it has forced all of us to go to it because the physical classes aren't happening, and that is a very positive in the aspect that students even in rural areas or people who had to go to not properly infrastructured government schools or where teachers were missing, those students are also able to get proper education through the online medium. But the online medium has its cons. That is frankly because younger children are not able to, they can't be self learners, so they are not self learners inherently, so teachers have to teach them. And so this extra access to education online is positive, but it isn't a very big positive. It hasn't, to be frank, I won't say it has a very significant advantage, and most of the important education happens in the earlier ages. So the infrastructure need of government schools, especially in India, that has to be the priority, and not much has changed there. So even with all the online improvements, I think that hasn't changed much, and the push there is still needed.
Okay. Thank you, Mohan. Going to take a couple of audience questions. One of our participants, Anand Inani, whom I may or may not know, his question is a $1 billion question. What will be the hot fields of the future? Is it AI, data science, manufacturing, agriculture? I think we can guess Rutika's answer to this, but I'm going to direct it to um, Ganesh and Rutika. Ganesh, if you'd like to take it first for a minute.
So the question again, sorry, was what is the future in terms of?
What will be the hot fields of the future? Is it going to be AI, data science, manufacturing, or agriculture?
Um, so so a couple of things, right? I obviously have a very different perspective from the rest of the panel, so I'm going to be on a spot here. Um, so looking at the larger picture, I think we're going to need a lot more focus in the near term on aspects like data science and AI. But I think as we look almost a few decades outside, I think maybe a decade outside, we might need to go back and relook at at the way we do agriculture, because at the end of the day, we still have a lot of people, and I'm not talking just about at the level of of education. I'm talking, if you look at it as a global challenge, some of the global challenges we are facing, feeding people continues to be a problem. And as we look out into the future, you'll have more mouths to feed and you'll have less arable land that's available. So I think we need to get I think in the near term, definitely AI and data science would be very valuable in terms of making the tools that we have more efficient working for the people. But I think in the looking further out, I think we definitely need focus on agriculture and sustainable agriculture that does not waste land. I hope I answer your question.
Yeah, thank you, Ganesh. Ritika, you want to answer that briefly?
Yeah, I can just give a quick answer, right? So I think there are multiple ways of looking at this. I think it's basically a supply demand gap in the market, right? That we're trying to see how to fill. And then you can try to see, do you fall in the end of, supply demand gap where you make the most money? But there are many opportunities in the middle as well, depending on interest and skill levels. Even today, for example, I think there's a huge shortage of jobs for car mechanics. It is not a job that requires AI or ML skills, but there is a gap in the market, right? So I think what to me is important is to be able for us as a society, as universities, as companies to identify where are these gaps, how do we help people that don't have jobs understand what these gaps are, fill these gaps, and that's how you get to better outcomes for everybody in society, right? In terms of going forward, jobs of the future, definitely AI/ML is one part of it, right? Or anything that's related to technology is one part of it. However, there are so many other jobs that exist that will continue to exist that just need to be identified, and then we need to figure out how to match those gaps as well.
Thank you, Ritika. And last
I feel
question.
tempted to add something, Mohan.
Yes, please go ahead, Rajan.
Just a half a minute.
Sure.
I think that I support Rutika in what she's talking about the demand and supply. So, if we have to rise above these economic aspects of education, you still look at what would AI lead to, what would cloud computing lead to, what would cybersecurity lead to. They all turn into services. Look into manufacturing. You buy a wonderful cell phone for hundreds of thousands of rupees, but if it doesn't give you the service that you need, then all that manufacturing and all that product has gone for waste. So ultimately, the convergence finally has to be into service, irrespective of what is in demand, what is in supply. If we can all gear up to think of, and even Puranas, if you talk about that, the whole concept of seva, the whole concept of servitization is exactly the core and essence of all what we do. So thank you. I just wanted to add that, but sorry, I was tempted to butt in.
No, that was very good. Thank you. So Stephen Hawking believed that you got to be careful about AI, otherwise it might lead to extinction of human civilization. But that's a slightly off topic. So I'm going to take one last question from audience. It's Akshat Agrawal, and I'm going to ask Rutika to take this. Does gender biases still exist in society, and if so, what's the remedy? So a little bit of hot button topic. Are you still here, Rutika?
She might have dropped out.
I think she left. If anybody else wants to take that, does gender bias still exist, and if yes, what's the remedy?
All male panel now, but
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
gender bias obviously exists. The remedy, I don't know. Remedy would be very complex. So how I perceive the world, how my wife perceives the world, there's a whole lot of a difference. And yeah, to be frank, Akshat, no one knows the remedy of such a complex thing. We can all try to be less biased towards a different gender, but frankly, I don't know the answer to that.
Actually, if you look at it carefully, technology has become a great equalizer for everything. So even gender biases, technology takes care of them. It's not dependent on what gender it is. So biases are something that you can see in action only when you become prejudiced about something. But I think technology binds us all and puts us all into an equalizer. So there may be subconsciously some gender biases that may still stay over a period of time. I'm sure that they will go away.
Thank you, Rajan. this is going to conclude this track, Future of Education. Thank you very much, all the speakers. It was very interesting and a learning experience for me. Hopefully, thank you all the audience. Hopefully everybody got something out of this session. Thank you,
Thanks a
everybody.
lot, Mohan, and all the panelists. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.